At this point, I don't think it's any secret that I'm a pretty big fan of Canon cameras, but I also recognize that there's really no best camera, and I think that's an important thing to understand. Everything is great in its own way these days, and what is best is really just dependent on what your needs are and what you're looking for in terms of your workflow. So for me, I've just found that Canon meets those needs a lot. But I think it's really important to also understand what's out there, and it would be foolish of me to totally ignore something as incredible as the Sony A7 III. So this video is going to be what I love about the Sony A7 III. In no particular order, this is not a deep dive into features. This camera has been out for a while now, so you probably know the features, or if you're in the market for it, there's 1,000 other places that go into the tech specs of this camera way better than I can. But what I wanted to do was take a really objective look, like forget that I am used to one camera system, and just look at this camera objectively, spend a decent chunk of time with it, and see what stands out to me. So what I've done is I've borrowed an A7 III for about the last month, and I've been trying to just use it the same way I would normally use my EOS R, just sort of put it through the paces, incorporate it in my workflow from time to time, and really get a feel for it, not because I'm doing a review or a comparison, but just as it stands on its own. A while back, I did do a comparison video about the A7 III and the Canon EOS R, and I did get quite a bit of constructive feedback about some of my criticisms of the A7 III in that video, so I also wanted to take a chance and just explore those. So right off the bat, the first thing I love about the Sony A7 III is the fact that it exists, which probably sounds kind of dumb and silly, but really, when this camera came out, it was incredibly disruptive, and it seems like what Sony did was they released some of their own cameras, they watched other companies release cameras, and they actually like sat back and listened to how those were received by all kinds of different customers, and then it was like they just took everything that people were asking for, almost everything, and smashed it into one camera, released it at an incredibly competitive price point, and it just sort of disrupted everything. And I love that because that's the kind of thing that pushes other companies to then do better. And I think that a big reason we now have something like the EOS R, which is my favorite camera, is because the Sony A7 III kind of pushed that move forward by some of the companies that were kind of dragging their feet a little bit. So the fact that it exists is one of my favorite features about this camera. But beyond that, it's important to look at image quality. It is a camera after all, and the image quality from this thing is amazing. It's got this beautiful full frame sensor. You can shoot full frame 4K on that sensor, which is just, it's awesome. The image quality, absolutely outstanding. I don't know what it is about Sony cameras, but I've always found them to be really sharp, and a good kind of sharp, not like an artificial sharpness. When I used to use my RX100 Mark V for like every video that I did, when I started my channel, one of the best things about this camera is just how sharp and crisp all the footage looked, and the A7 III, you know, does that to a whole different degree. And that's one of my favorite things about this camera, just how easy it is to make things look really, really good. So the image quality for both photo and video is just off the charts, terrific. It is a camera after all. Image quality should be one of the main things we're looking at. Moving on from there, revisiting one of the areas that I talked about in my last video, I actually do want to say that one of the things I love about the A7 III is the battery life. In my comparison video, I said that the battery life on the A7 III was terrible. The things I don't like about this camera are the battery life, it's terrible, and then I got like lit on fire in the comment sections because people were very upset that I said that. But here's kind of that whole story. The reason I said that was I was using the A7 III as part of my normal workflow at work, where I've been using Canon cameras since like 2012, 2013. And a lot of that was to film and photograph high school football games. And for all those years with Canon cameras, you know, football games 3.5 hours, I had no issue with a single LPE6 battery, just kind of the standard Canon battery, lasting for the entire football game. It was never an issue. I literally never had to think about battery life, no matter how much video I filmed, no matter how many photos I took, no matter how much time I switched between those. And when I started using the A7 III for those football games, it wasn't lasting through an entire game. It was fully charged at the beginning and dead by like the third quarter. That, to me, wasn't great. To be honest, I have no idea why I was getting that terrible battery life, but I thought it was worth revisiting. So what I've been doing is literally sometimes almost side by side using the A7 III with the EOS R, not trying to just turn them on and see which one lasts the longest, but just using them the way I would normally use a camera. And what I have found is that even though the Canon LPE6 is 1865 milliamps and the Sony, what is this battery? This is the NPFZ100 is 2280 milliamps, so it's significantly bigger than the Canon battery. The A7 III does drain about 10% faster than the EOS R. I don't know why. I've tried this multiple times and those are the results I'm getting consistently, at least with the settings that I use. Fortunately though, even though it is strange that a bigger battery is draining faster than a smaller battery, the EOS R's battery life is amazing. And so if this is on par with that, even if it does drain 10% faster, it's still really good battery life. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're filming for hours on end or taking photos for hours on end, that 10% doesn't make a huge difference. So for all intents and purposes, I would almost be okay saying that the A7 III battery is just as good as the EOS R battery life. My thought is the reason I was getting really bad battery life before was I must have had something on, some kind of camera setting that was draining it in the background, so I made sure to just reset the camera, start from scratch, and then from there, the battery life has been much improved. And speaking of battery life, one of the features I love, which is a little tiny thing, it's one of the reasons I was able to measure the battery life so easily, is the fact that the A7 III displays the battery percentage on screen, not just the bars. Canon, if you want to go see the battery's percentage, you have to dig into the menus, but on screen it's just sort of like 3 or 4 bars and you can kind of estimate how much battery life you have left. This camera just tells you exactly what percentage is left. And for me, for whatever reason, that was just really comforting to know exactly how much battery life I had left at all times. It's a really small feature, but it was something that I just found myself enjoying time and again while using this camera. Next thing I love about the A7 III is actually the body of the camera itself. There are dials and buttons just all over this thing. And the cool part, especially Sony's always been good about this, is you can reprogram pretty much every one of them to be whatever you want. So whatever your workflow is, whatever you're used to, whatever works best for you, you can map those settings to these buttons. And there are just so many different buttons and dials. They even did something that I really wish happened on the EOS R. This little dial right here, on the EOS R, they got rid of that. That had been, Canon cameras had had that little dial for ages, and on the EOS R, it's just like a directional pad, and they moved the dial up here, where the A7 III has one as well, but it's just so natural to spin through settings, scroll through photos with a dial right here where your thumb is that I really wish the EOS R had that. And then not only does it still have this dial, but it does have this dial here, and then they got a dial up here. There's 3 dials on this camera, plus a joystick, which is also a button, plus all the other just buttons, including just dedicated custom function buttons, and then 2 mode dials, and it's very easy to operate this camera once you get the hang of it, and more importantly, it's very easy to adapt the A7 III to whatever your habits, your needs, your most used features are. So it's a very customizable camera, and I love that. It just, again, makes your workflow, everything in your workflow, that much easier just because you have full control over how the camera operates. And it's probably not fair to talk about image quality without talking about low light performance, and I think that it's pretty fair to say Sony dominates the market when it comes to low light performance. They pretty much always have since they started releasing like the A7 series. It's kind of magical what these cameras can do in the dark, and of course other cameras, mirrorless cameras like the EOS R, have incredible low light performance as well. In fact, let's compare the low light performance between the EOS R and the Sony A7 III. I've tried to set the 2 cameras up to have similar shots, but they are going to be a little bit different because I'm using different lenses. On the EOS R, I'm using the Sigma 24mm 1.4, and on the A7 III, I'm using the Sigma 16mm 1.4. So it's a little bit wider, but I wanted to use these 2 lenses because they both go to 1.4 for the aperture, and both cameras are set with an ISO of 160, filming at 1/50th of a second, so they have the exact same settings. The way that I wanted to test the low light performance was to just use some low light. So The light I'm using right now, the Falcon Eyes RX18, is set to 85% brightness. If I turn the light all the way off, now I just have a fill light coming in. So this is not an ideal filming condition, but it's definitely a situation where low light performance is probably gonna become a little more obvious. This is ISO 320, and really anything under 1,000, both these cameras should be good. So this now is ISO 1000. To make the test a little tougher, I'm gonna turn off my fill light. Now we're filming with just my background LEDs at ISO 1000. Now we're at ISO 2500, which ironically the shot is looking somewhat overexposed. So let's turn off some of these lights. So here is ISO 2500. It's really dark in here. Like, I would have a hard time seeing if I was doing actual work in here, but the image looks pretty darn bright. Just curious to see how clean the image actually is. Let's go completely crazy here. So I'm gonna turn off the other LED lights. Even this is only one fill light. The only lights coming into this room now are from a window that is shut, the blinds are closed, and these tiny LEDs in the cabinet back there. Let's bump this up even more. This is ISO 6400. Again, it's really dark in here. I could completely fall asleep very easily. And this is ISO 12800. I had to close the aperture a little bit, so both cameras are recording at 2.8. I also bumped the A7 III, so the shot might have changed just a little bit. And let's take it as far as it will go. This is still 2.8 aperture with an ISO of 25,600. This is the max for the EOS R. It's as high as the ISO can go. The A7 III still has a little bit of room, so let's see. This is the A7 III at 64,000 ISO, and this is the A7 III at 102,400 ISO, just a completely insane number. Just to give you a reference, this is how it actually feels in the room. This is with an ISO of 160 and an aperture of 1.4. If I start bringing back some of my light, then it'll start to feel a little more normal in here. And then of course the big light. So just the fact that the A7 III even has some of those ISO settings is completely ridiculous. I don't know how often you'd actually want to use them, but they're there, and that is kind of amazing. So even though there's no such thing as a perfect camera, the A7 III is arguably one of the best cameras around, and that's really high praise, because we live in a world where like every camera is amazing, and even though this camera is a couple years old now, it's still an incredible value. It's still super powerful. It's still, you know, one of the best choices out there, especially if you're someone who wants to get into the Sony E-mount lens system where they have some really nice lenses. It is an incredibly solid choice. So even though I'm someone who leans towards Canon cameras, that's just because the way I'm doing things now and the way I've been doing things for a while, they fit into my workflow really well. I love a lot about them, but that doesn't mean that other cameras are bad, or it doesn't mean that someone who's using a different type of camera is wrong. It's just, they're all different tools. We can all use them to create incredible work, and the most important thing is to find the best tool that works for you.